If it was up to me to talk about the job, it's first about the head and then about the hands. Not to disparage dressmaking, because dressmaking is definitely part of it. And Orry Kelly did have an incredibly refined understanding of the human body and working with proportion and scale. And of course, Billy Wilder, as the director, was the smartest man in any room. He only wants to work with the smartest people on the planet.
Been waiting long?
It's not how long you wait, it's who you're waiting for.
Thank
He
you.
wants a partnership, and he found that partnership with Orry Kelly, who really delivered on the wit and intelligence of the costumes.
Did you get my flowers? You know, those orchids from my greenhouse.
Costume historians, I think they all recognize that Orry Kelly is in the pantheon of film costume designers. But I think the general public really didn't know him that well. I mean, Orry Kelly was a rough and tumble guy from Australia who had honed his talents in New York on the stage and in nightclubs and sold ties on the street of New York to survive.
There were great costume designers working at the same time. Certainly, Travis Banton was one of the great costume designers in Hollywood, working on a parallel path as a studio designer at Paramount, working with people like Marlene Dietrich and Claudia Colbert. And there was Adrian working at MGM, working with Joan Crawford and Jean Harlow and Norma Shearer. There was Edith Head, who followed Travis Banton at Paramount.
Orry Kelly was also openly, unabashedly, and unapologetically gay. And unlike other people in the industry that went into fake marriages and played the line that the studios asked you to perform, he refused to or wasn't able to. He was very quarrelsome, got into fights with Jack Warner, who was his boss at Warner Brothers. And I think another reason why people may not know him is because, unlike Adrian, who got to design these spectacular fantasy numbers that MGM created, or Travis Banton, who created these glamorous fashion films, for the majority of his career, Orry Kelly worked for Warner Brothers. And they were known for their sort of gritty, down-to-earth, sort of streetwise films. So he really didn't have those types of films to design for. But what he did do instead was he put details into those simple designs. I mean, they were simple designs, but they were not simple at all. He was brilliant in the fabrics that he used and the way that he used them. They just were on less fabulous clothes.
The greatest costume designers are not people who simply deliver surface decoration or make beautiful clothes. Orry Kelly was certainly a great dressmaker, but it's really the delivering of these believable personalities that is the greatest quality a costume designer can have.
I think that the costumes that Orry Kelly designed for Monroe in the film perfectly displayed what made Monroe a sex icon in the first place. They're certainly out there. They're certainly risque, but there's also an innocence about them.
You know, she's not a bad girl. She sets her boundaries. She sells kisses for the milk fund. She's not a hooker. She lets a strap slip, and okay, she doesn't wear any underwear.
I don't think that the dresses had anything to do with 1920s, where the film was set. I mean, there were attempts made to not have a waistline, and there were crystal dangles, which sort of gave the appearance of a flapper dress. But the fit of the dress had nothing to do with 20s.
Well, I have a philosophy about period accurate. You don't find it in the movies. There was never a movie that was period accurate. They all look like their own time. And we only know sometimes a decade later or 2 decades later. Gosh, even the James Ivory movies from the 80s, which we thought were so accurate at the time, now look so 80s. So what Orry Kelly was doing was designing a movie that was period-ish. Marilyn Monroe was never going to look like Louise Brooks. Let's face it. She was never going to look like a flat-chested, period-accurate, bob-haired young flapper from 1927. That was never going to happen, and that was not what was being asked from Marilyn, and it was not what was being asked from Orry Kelly. It was period-ish, and Orry Kelly did a superb job.
Even though Monroe's dresses weren't accurate as far as 20s fashion, the costumes for Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon are fairly accurate. And there's a story behind those fashions. They took Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon to Western Costume and had them try on dresses of the 20s, Debbie Reynolds and I think Norma Shearer, and they didn't fit. They looked like they were men wearing women's clothes, and it just didn't work.
Well, it was not going to work for Curtis and Lemmon to choose their own clothes out of women's stock. Men are simply not built like women.
Florida Limited leaving on track 1 for
And so they decided to ask if Orry Kelly would design theirs too. And the main reason they did, because they wanted to be on the joke too. And they wanted the costumes that were designed for them to be part of the joke too.
What's the matter now?
How do they walk in these things, huh? How do they keep their balance?
Must be the way the weight is distributed. Now, come on.
And so he designed
So
fashions for
crafty.
them, which are probably truer to 20s fashion because they're in heavier fabrics and satins with long sleeves, high necklines, minimal ornamentation, all designed to cover up as much body as possible.
Where did you girls play before?
Here and there and around.
They didn't wear funny clothes. I mean, if you notice in the movie, their clothes are pretty straight. They don't look like drag queens who are about to perform.
You're welcome.
I mean, when they join that band and they show up at the train, they're dressed appropriately. And you remember that they're so prudish when they join the band. It was all, oh my goodness. And they get on the train as seminary girls.
Overnight in a piece
So
of
they're
shit.
dressed in a very straight way and in coordinated outfits, which was correct for the period, with matching hats and gloves and dresses. They're meant to look like women, even though it's so obvious to us, the audience, that they're just silly men.
The things I think that stand out most about Orry Kelly were probably the fact that things didn't stand out. He was very conscious not to have the clothes upstage the character, but enhance the character, and to stay ahead of the time, which the studio designers had to do because it would oftentimes take a year before the film was released. So you wanted the costumes to always be ahead in fashion. I think that the design, the work that he did on the other characters, they were all a little bit more covered, a little bit more, they weren't as sexual as Marilyn's were.
In terms of costume design, and Orry Kelly being a master of costume design, he would never bring the Sweet Sues forward because we're just supposed to be looking at our two seminary girls in the back and our star, Sugarcane, in the front. So the Sweet Sues, when we see them, are really background action. They're just meant to be set dressing for our principals. And that's always the way it is with costume design. You have your principals who are telling the story. They're the ones who are the center of the frame and the center of our attention.
I've locked my heart, I'll keep my feelings there. I've stopped
The two most provocative dresses in the film are the black and the nude. The black is a black chiffon and actually shows more skin than the nude one does. Its big design element, even though it is a completely closed back, it exposes both cheeks of a rear end.
Another bridesmaid? Flower girl!
So when you actually look at that dress and you see what is showing, a lot is showing of her.
You know how some people can tell really dirty jokes? and they're funny, and other people can tell those same jokes, and they're distasteful and vulgar. Orry Kelly could make naked costumes and still make them elegant and look refined and witty. It's just the difference between Cole Porter and the rest of the world. Who is telling the joke? Orry Kelly's telling the joke. He can tell it, make it sexy, and not make it dirty. That's something that he could offer as a designer.
Look at all that silverware.
Trophies.
The nude dress actually is made of a thicker fabric, especially the body part of it, but it was dyed to match her skin so that you didn't know where her body left off and the dress began. It's beaded with thousands of gold and silver rhinestones in a water wash pattern and then has dangling sequins. Now, the dress is a strap dress, totally backless, from the neckline down to where it had to stop. So everything on the front, and there's a lot going on in the front, the dress is supporting. Nothing else is supporting. There's no bra, there's no underpinnings at all. The dress is doing all the work. It's holding everything in, and it's holding everything up.
When I first saw this film as a little girl, I couldn't believe my eyes. I was so scandalized. Those dresses are shocking. The nude part of the dresses is a fabric that's no longer used anymore. It's called souffle, spelled like souffle. When I was a young designer, I saw the last bolts at Paramount. It was the lightest chiffon fabric ever manufactured, but it almost spontaneously combusted. So you could imagine, with all the smoking on the sets in those days, how dangerous this fabric was. And souffle was usually used for brasiers or undergarments in the 30s, 40s, and 50s because it would be dyed the color of your skin and completely disappear. So this was the fabric that was used on that nude dress, where it just seemed like her breasts were anti-gravity, where they're just floating, and there was no visible undergarments. And so every single rhinestone and bead had to be strategically placed to do its work on that souffle.
I have several Orry Kelly pieces in my collection. This is probably the most important one. If you were going to be a legitimate collector, you needed to have a Monroe. This is probably the most I've ever spent on a costume. It took me 2 years to pay it off. And I do think it is a wonderful example of Monroe in one of her most provocative dresses. The back is literally open all the way from the neckline to the very top of her rear end. There is nothing holding this dress up except the dress itself. The stole is made of eiderdown, very fragile, very opulent. And even at the time the dress was made, it was a dress that Sugar could never have afforded. But it was Hollywood, and she was Marilyn Monroe, so why not?
What's on Thursday?
It's the cruise night off.
There was another element in Some Like It Hot. It was a black and white movie. So there's a lot of contrast in the costumes, but he also uses fringe. There's fringe, so there's movement on Marilyn's clothes. He uses lots of sparkle and lots of crystal on her clothes, so there's lots of reflected light. And he uses silhouette, so you'll notice on the hats of Lemon and Curtis, there is adornment on the hats. There's fur. So he's using all of the techniques that costume designers use traditionally on black and white movies beautifully and with so much humor. I mean, I am so sorry I never got to meet him because I'm sure he was incredibly funny because his clothes are funny, and yet the clothes never step on the comedy in the movie.
One of the little witticisms that Orry Kelly put into this dress was they cut out heart on her left buttock. Unless you know what you're looking for, you don't see it in the film. It does show,
yes,
but
of
you have
course.
to
I'm
know what
silly
you're
of me. On
looking for.
Thursdays, they always
It was
wear
probably a
small
joke
flowers.
between him and Monroe. It's ringed in red beads and has little teardrops, so it's a bleeding heart.
Marilyn was famous for being most comfortable in the nude. The more naked she could be, the happier she was. And even Wilder said, she'll be happy if she can show the most skin possible.
One of the construction things on the dress was that lead weights were sewn into small pockets on the hem and on the back of the dress. Now, the lead weights do not get along with touching fabric and were taken out of the pockets to preserve the dress. But it is amazing the depths they went to get a dress. I mean, this would pull down and pull in to her rear end, so it gave the body shape. R. Kelly often said that he designed by distraction, which meant if there was a body flaw that you didn't want to show, you would create something to distract the eye. For example, with Betty Davis, who would allow you to constrict her in any possible way in a period film. In contemporary films, she refused any sort of underpinnings, no bras whatsoever. And so Orry Kelly would do things like by putting details like frills up by the neckline to draw your attention away from what was going on down below.
The film that shows off Orry Kelly's intelligence and wit and glamour the best is Anti-Mame with Rosalind Russell. He wasn't even supposed to design that movie. That movie was going to be designed by the great Gilbert Adrian, and then Adrian died, and Orry Kelly took over, and thank goodness he did. Every single change that Rosalind Russell wears is another brilliant commentary of the time, place, season, her travels. It's just a hot fudge sundae without the calories for anybody who loves costume, fashion. It's absolutely wonderful.
There's a sort of a joke that he went from dressing Rosalind Russell in Anti-Mame in almost everything in the world to dressing Marilyn Monroe in almost nothing. Every single fashion trend, every single fabric you could ever put on somebody, he put on Rosalind Russell in that film. So I absolutely love that. But then I also like the clean classicness in Casablanca and the look and stuff that he creates in that. And the wardrobe he created for Ingrid Bergman has become a classic film design.
You know, you can't take costumes out of the context for which they were designed. You can look at them individually as garments. I mean, you can say, oh, it's so beautifully made. We can turn it inside out. Look, Hollywood couture. Isn't that wonderful? French seams. But that's not what Orry Kelly contributed to this movie. Yes, the clothes are beautiful, but his contribution is in the storytelling and supporting the storytelling of the film.